Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the September edition of the Southeast Monthly Climate Webinar, where we talk about the climate and special topics pertaining to the Southeast region. My name is Chris Furman. I'm the regional climatologist with NOAA's Southeast Regional Climate Center, and I'll be giving a climate overview of the past month. Our speakers today are Todd Hamill from the Southeast River Forecast Center, who will be providing a water resources update. We have Pam Knox from the University of Georgia, who will provide an agricultural impacts update. And joining us today from the U.S. Geological Survey, we have Emily Reed, Randy Butler, and Nicole Feltz, who will give our special topics presentation on modernizing how you access water data. So thank you all for joining us this morning. Just a reminder to type your questions and comments into the question box at any time, and they'll be answered at the end. Also, a recap email of this webinar will be sent out with a YouTube link to this recording in the next day or so. All right, so let's jump into the climate. So over the past 30 days across the Southeast, we've seen generally above average temperatures, especially across eastern portions of North Carolina and Virginia. Also, much of Florida has been above average. We also see some areas across Alabama and Georgia where temperatures have been slightly below average. And in fact, across parts of southern Alabama, some temperatures have been between about 2 and 3 degrees below average for the last 30 days or so. Looking at Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands there on the right, we see the temperatures have been generally near normal to maybe slightly above normal over the past month or so. All right, next slide. If we look at precipitation, precipitation was variable. Seems like we say that a lot in the Southeast. Some areas saw rainfall deficits over the last 30 days. That was especially the case across eastern portions of North Carolina and Virginia, also across portions of the northern Gulf Coast. We did see above average precipitation across some interior portions of the Southeast. And in particular, precipitation was above average across a good chunk of Central Florida, the Central Florida peninsula there. And if you look on the right, you see Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. That's largely the result of Fiona, which we'll talk about here in a second. You can see precipitation over the last 30 days, much above average due to Hurricane Fiona. All right, next slide. Okay, so unfortunately, we added over the last several weeks, we've added to the lightning fatality total in the U.S. Since the last webinar, we've had 4 additional fatalities, all in the Southeast, 2 in Florida and 2 in Puerto Rico. So that brings the annual year-to-date total in the U.S. of 19 lightning-related fatalities. 13 of those across the Southeast and Puerto Rico. Next slide. Okay, so Hurricane Fiona. So Fiona was the 6th named storm in the Atlantic Basin this season. It was the first major hurricane of the season, reaching Category 4 status. You can see the track animation there on the left as it impacted Puerto Rico. It developed from a tropical wave off West Africa, and then developed into a tropical depression near the Leeward Islands on September the 14th, and it became a named storm, Fiona, the next day. The day after that, on the 16th, it entered the Caribbean Sea and strengthened into a hurricane. That's where the animation starts on the left as it approached Puerto Rico. The next day, the island, as well as the U.S. Virgin Islands, was put under a hurricane watch and eventually a hurricane warning. Fiona made landfall along the southwest coast of Puerto Rico on the 18th of September as a Category 1 hurricane with maximum sustained winds of 85 miles an hour, although there were reports of wind gusts on Puerto Rico over 110 miles an hour. And one of the big stories from Fiona, of course, was the rainfall. You can see the map there of accumulated rainfall from the storm over about a 5-day period from the 16th to the 20th of the month. This is from the National Weather Service, and you can see that even on the leeward side there of the island, rainfall totals were still above 6 inches, but if you look on the windward slopes, the rainfall was 15 to 20, in some cases over 30 inches. So quite a bit of rainfall, as I'm sure many of you heard. Many comparisons have been made to Hurricane Maria, one of the worst hurricanes to impact Puerto Rico. That was back in 2017. So a lot of the impacts that we have heard about and have seen, roads being stripped of pavement, numerous landslides, rock falls, could be looking at millions of dollars worth of crop damages, bridges washed away, impassable roads, fallen trees, structural damage, and unfortunately the list goes on. So the impacts, which are still being assessed, look to be pretty significant. There's still, by my count as of the other day, there still looks to be about 500,000 to maybe 700,000 people on the island still without power, and anywhere from about a quarter to 30% of the island still without water. That was as of late last week. So hopefully that's improved somewhat since then. And as of yesterday, there were at least 16 confirmed deaths in Puerto Rico from Hurricane Fiona. And that number, unfortunately, may be going up over time. Next slide. Okay, so in the short term, we've got Hurricane Ian approaching Florida right now. It crossed Cuba this morning. It's now in the Gulf of Mexico, and it is expected to strengthen here over the next couple days and also slow down. So the impacts from Ian are expected to be pretty significant across Florida. We've got storm surge warnings out. Storm surge in places like Tampa Bay may exceed 10 feet from the storm. Possible landfall in that area by Thursday morning, at least that's what the projections are right now, with winds on the low end of Category 2 to maybe, or I'm sorry, on the high end of Category 2, low end Category 3. And as far as the rain goes, I think Pam has a slide on this later on, but portions of the northern Florida peninsula may see as much as 6 to 15, in some cases over 20 inches of rain. And that rain, although not as significant, may extend up into the southeast. That could have impacts in terms of the drought that we'll talk about here in a second. So we'll be watching Ian very closely. There's also a disturbance out in the eastern portion of the basin that has a 70% chance of development over the next several days. So unfortunately, once we're done with Ian, probably this weekend, we're going to have to turn our attention to that disturbance probably next week. Okay, next slide. Okay, and here's the latest track from Ian, the latest track map here as of 8 o'clock this morning, Eastern time. And again, you can see Ian not only strengthening, but also slowing down as it approaches the western Florida coast. And so the impact from that with regards to storm surge, sustained strong winds, okay, over a period of probably several days, coupled with very high rainfall rates, lots of flooding. Looks like the impacts are going to be pretty significant from the storm. So we'll be keeping our eye on that here over the next several days. Next slide. Okay, an ENSO update. So we've been talking about the potential here over the last several months now. We've been talking about the potential for a triple dip La Niña, and it looks like that is going to come to fruition here as we head into the winter season. It looks like chances of a La Niña are at least 90%. They do drop, though, quite a bit as we head into spring. And so actually by the January, February, March period, we actually see a slightly better chance of transitioning to neutral conditions. And in fact, by later this winter and into next spring, we're looking at a transition from La Niña to ENSO neutral conditions. Next slide. And so I just wanted to put that triple dip La Niña into some climatological context. So this is a time series of El Nino La Niña conditions from Jan Knoll at Golden Gate Weather. And it shows that historically, at least since 1950, if this triple dip La Niña does come to fruition, it would only be the third triple dip La Niña that we've had since 1950. Okay, the other ones occurred back from 1973 to 1976. The last one occurred from 1998 to 2001. And it's somewhat interesting to see that we've had 26 La Niñas since 1950, including this one, and 21 of the 26 have either been double dips or triple dips. So it's not that unusual. In fact, it's more common to see La Niñas either back to back or every once in a while back to back to back. Okay, next slide. Okay, as far as the drought goes, we really haven't had much drought to worry about across the southeast here over the last month or so. Precipitation has been above average in many places. This goes back to the middle part of the summer. And so drought conditions have generally been in pretty good shape, with some exceptions that I'll talk about here on the next slide. You can see based on the short-term drought indicator blend here, which is largely based on SPI over the last 1 to 3 months. You can see that a good portion of the southeast, especially across parts of Alabama, South Carolina, and Georgia, have been fairly wet, but you see some areas there in South Florida and eastern portions of North Carolina and Virginia that have been dry. And if you go to the next slide, that lines up pretty well with where we see mostly abnormally dry conditions, but also some D1, some moderate drought has also sort of crept back in as well. And we see that across, again, across parts of eastern North Carolina and eastern Virginia, as well as South Florida as well. But with Ian approaching, as Pam I think is going to show later, much of this is probably going to be eliminated or improved quite a bit here over the next several days and into the weekend. All right, next slide. If we look at the 3-month outlook, very La Niña-esque in some cases, so above average temperatures projected here through the basically through the end of the year. As far as precipitation, equal chances of above or below average precip across North Carolina and Virginia, as well as South Florida. Elsewhere across the region, it looks like better chance of below average precipitation. Next slide. As far as the drought outlook, no drought is expected here over the next several months. So that's good news. Next slide. And I just wanted to highlight real quick, since we're heading, it's almost October, and so many of us are thinking about fall foliage, okay? And this is from AccuWeather. This is their fall foliage outlook that was released late last month. And looks like there are some places of the country that appear to be looking pretty good as far as the foliage goes, especially across parts of the Great Lakes, parts of the Northeast, and also parts of the Intermountain West and parts of the Pacific Northwest, areas that have been generally drier and hotter over the last several months. So the Western U.S., the Central Plains, Southern Plains, as well as parts of the Southeast look to be either normal or maybe slightly underperforming as far as the foliage may go. So we'll see how that pans out here over the next couple of months. All right, next slide. And on that note, I just wanted to highlight, in terms of fall foliage, we have a great resource here on the Southeast Regional Climate Center webpage. So you can go to the link, it's there on the bottom right. But if you go to our homepage and go to the header at the top under Specialty Climate, we have a fall foliage link where we've got lots of great resources to keep track of the foliage if you're out traveling and want to see where the most vibrant colors are. So be sure to check out that page when you get a chance. Next slide. And this is just a summary highlighting what we've discussed so far. And in the interest of time, I'll go ahead and I believe pass it off to Todd.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about our autumn flood outlook. And so let's get started and let's look a little bit back at the past and kind of where we are now. When you look at our 28-day average streamflow, now again, this is across the whole Southeast, we're in pretty good shape. We've had plenty of water with some exceptions of some low water. And just as a reminder, for this time of year, this is typically for the Southeast, except for Florida. Florida's kind of a different animal, but this is usually when we kind of our rivers are at their lowest at this time of year. And part of the reason for that is during tropical season, typically it stays dry during this time of year unless we have tropical weather. And this year we've had a little bit of tropical moisture and stuff without any tropical storms, but it looks like this week that is going to change, but that's kind of typically what we would expect in Florida. But otherwise we're in pretty good shape right now going into fall. So let's go ahead, we'll take a little bit closer look at each of the ones, but first we're going to talk about our 7-day average stream flow compared to the entire year. So what that's on the left-hand side is the showing the average compared to the entire year, and what this is showing is that typically during this time of year, a lot of these places, this is where they're supposed to be their lowest. So this is their current condition over the last 7 days as compared to where they are through the rest of the year. And so you'll see over much of the southeast until we get to Florida that our stream flows are below normal. And just not, let me rephrase that. They're below where they would be during other times of year. And so I just want to kind of give you perspective on that as we look at our next few slides in just a moment, that that even though we're still in the normal range for this time of year, this is the time of year when we would expect below normal stream flows. Now we get down into Florida and that changes a little bit. Puerto Rico also, but we're looking more closely at Florida. Even though we have some higher levels there, this is typically when we would expect to have higher levels. And their dry season comes in that November through April timeframe. So that's when we would expect the lowest flows in those areas. So I just wanted to kind of give a perspective as we went forward. So, so on the right-hand slide, it shows our typical period for low stream flow. And so for most of the southeast, as I mentioned before, August through October is when we expect our lowest stream flow as we come out of the summer months and we're transitioning from summer through the fall and into the winter. We typically are more dry and our stream flows are a little bit lower this time of year. For Florida, May is usually the time of year when we have our lowest stream flow, and that's usually comes at the end of the dry season, which makes a lot of sense. Now let's look very specifically at each of the different states. We'll go to the next slide. And what we find here, Alabama is in good shape. We've had enough rain there, and of course, as was mentioned before, we haven't had much drought, so our stream flows are supposed typically pretty low this time of year. So having those stream flows be a little bit higher right now is a little unusual, but it's good news for those areas that need that want that water and have that water in their rivers. Georgia's in a very similar situation where we've had enough rainfall through the state that we don't have any issues there. And Florida, while it was starting to, as we were getting to the end of July, again, this is kind of a wet time of year it's supposed to be, we were really starting to dry out there. They're actually starting to, as was mentioned also, they've had some recent rainfalls that have had a big impact on some of their rivers, especially around the Tampa area, and even around Jacksonville and the Santa Fe River Basin. So things have improved, and now they're more in a wet time of year. Their wet season has not been especially active until just the last couple of weeks. So, so it looks like the end of their wet season is going to be very active. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And we will show South Carolina now, and you know, we have been kind of dipping into being a little bit more dry in the Carolinas. And part of that is, again, this time of year, climatologically, tropical weather brings a good portion of their rainfall. It brings a good portion of their rainfall for the year. So if they don't get rainfall from tropical or from a hurricane or a tropical system, it tends to keep them a little bit low. So this is a low time of year. So in South Carolina and North Carolina, we're starting to creep towards having below normal stream flows in their areas. Also, our temperatures have mostly been above normal in those areas, so it's dried things out some. So that kind of gives you a feel there. And then for Virginia, we're very near normal, although we've been drying out recently, and they're starting to fall fairly quickly too. So if this trend continues, it looks like we may get into that dry area. But as the storm moves north, if it affects South Carolina and North Carolina, if it happens to get up there, it doesn't look like right now that they're going to see significant rain, but at least some rain would improve conditions in those areas. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is our, this was done yesterday, and there are our current conditions with the forecast, and the forecast included 48 hours of rainfall. So if I had updated that this morning, after our forecast this morning, a lot of these in Central Florida and in the St. John's Basin, and even up here into the Suwannee Basin in South Florida and in North Florida, we would see reds in moderate flood and purples in major flood for forecasts over the next couple of days. It does look like we're looking at extremely heavy rain, potential record rainfall and flooding in the Central Florida area and the Suwannee Basin up in North Florida. Suwannee Basin maybe not so much, just because of the way it looks like it's going to turn. One good thing right now, Lake Okeechobee is at a record, almost a record low level right now. So they can take the water, and they welcome the water right now. They were concerned as they were going into the winter that they wouldn't have enough water in the lake. This should improve those conditions. However, in a lot of cases in here, it looks like we're looking for some pretty significant flooding in Florida over the next week to 2 weeks. So let's go ahead and go on to the next slide. So this is the Southeast, our climatology, and you know I know we've shown this before, and our typical flood season for the Southeast is that winter season. We don't have much leaves on the trees. We don't have a whole lot going on. We don't have anything to compete as much with the water hitting the ground, and it tends to run off more quickly, so we tend to have flooding. Our other peak season is during tropical season. We need a lot more rainfall to get flooding in the Southeast, but typically that comes from tropical weather, which is why we have a second peak, and we're in week 39, and this is when we would kind of expect to have potential for flooding during this time due to tropical weather. But this is an overall look at the Southeast. Our next slide will show what Florida looks like. And with Florida, this time of year, this is week 39, this is when we expect our flooding. Again, sometimes during El Nino years, at the beginning of the year, we'll get some wet years during the January through March timeframe. But typically for Florida, this is when we would expect them to have the greatest flooding due to wet season in Florida and due to tropical weather in Florida. And so when we start to talk about normals, this is the time of year when it would be normal to have flooding in Florida. And we just haven't had as much of it up until the last few weeks, where we finally started to get some heavy rain in those areas and have started to see some flooding. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide, because we'll talk about so this helps to describe what we mean by normal risk for river flooding. So when we look at this, this is our high season risk, so if we get the tropical weather that moves into that area, right now it looks like we are going to finally get some significant flooding in the Florida area. It's still a near normal risk, only because you still never know with tropical systems and whether they're going to come into the area. And just because we had some recent rainfall, that would keep us in that potential flood scenario. As for the rest of the Southeast, right now, we're looking for near normal risk. Even with the storm that's coming up, it doesn't look like it's going to cause a whole lot of problems. Again, anytime we will get a tropical system into the Southeast, and we did expect a higher than normal season this year, and that has been backloaded a little bit. We didn't have a whole lot in the first major half of the season, but things have picked up just a little bit, so that could change a little bit. But it's really kind of a near normal risk, because we don't know where those things are going to hit. So we're in decent shape for the rest of the area. Florida does look like with the potential to get some pretty significant flooding over the next week or two. Let's go ahead and go to the end. I think that is my last slide, except for the summary. And so we'll go ahead and pass it off to Pam.
All right. Well, thank you, Todd. And we'll jump right in here with agricultural impacts, because we have a lot to cover yet. Just a reminder that it has been pretty warm in the last month, especially in Florida. And a lot of the Florida stations were ranked in the top 5 warmest for the August 25 through September 25 period. It's always pretty warm there anyway, but it's been, as expected, a little warmer than usual. Some of that probably reflects the warm ocean water that's been really along the coast and in the Gulf of Mexico. We haven't had any stirring up from hurricanes. And so most parts of the region have not been that warm, but certainly something to keep in mind. If we go on. All right, soil moisture on the right there shows that it's been relatively dry in a lot of the Southeast, except for Florida, as Todd mentioned. And so that's probably all about to change. And so we'll see those things change in the next week or so. Soil temperatures have been fairly cool in most of the Southeast, again, with the exception of the dry areas in eastern North Carolina and Virginia, where there's been some drought, and also in South Florida, where they've also been relatively dry until recently, and that will also change over time. If we go on, some of the impacts that we've seen from conditions, we had a pretty wet summer, and so we've had more recent dry conditions, which most farmers have appreciated because it allows them to get into their field and catch up on field work. Of course, it's harvest time now for a lot of things, and so the drier conditions have helped with harvest of some of the early peanuts and corn. There have been a lot of hay that's been cut, but the heavy rain that they have had in South Florida has disrupted the vegetable harvest down there and the rice harvest. Certainly that's going to continue to be an issue in the coming week or so with Ian coming in and bringing in even more rain. And that may also be a problem stretching out throughout Florida and down into Georgia as well. The wet conditions from earlier in the summer did cause a lot of problems with fungal diseases, and there's just a couple of pictures here that show that. And so that has caused some yield loss in cotton and in some of the other crops. I know I've seen some pictures of soybean where they've had tremendous amounts of loss due to fungal diseases. And so that will certainly eat into the yields that they get. So far in Virginia, even though they've been in drought, they are ahead of usual in planting winter wheat. You need some moisture in the soil for the seeds to germinate, so that doesn't seem to have been an issue so far. And then Chris talked about Hurricane Fiona in Puerto Rico. I have not yet seen any impacts of what that did to agriculture. It had to have some pretty severe impacts on agriculture in that region, but I haven't seen any assessments yet, so it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that. If we go on, a lot of my farmers are calling me right now asking what to do, as we don't know exactly where Ian's going to go. I think it's becoming more clear, but a couple days ago we didn't really know if it was going to take more western track or follow the eastern track that it seems like it's going now. So with people with crops near harvest, we're asking for some advice, and the advice that I got for cotton, if it was defoliated in the past week, they should pick it. Once it's defoliated, there's nothing there to protect it. Certainly the rain would not make it good, and if the wind was strong, as they were originally expecting, and of course many of the growers in southwestern Georgia are still thinking about Hurricane Michael from 2018 and how that happened almost the same week. Caused a lot of problems. So I've been seeing a lot of pictures on Twitter of cotton being harvested in advance of the storm, especially while the weather is nice. And peanuts they're just starting to harvest the peanuts. If they're in the ground, so they've got a little bit more protection. But peanuts that are ripe and ready to go, especially if the stems aren't very good, the nuts will stay in the ground instead of being harvested, and then they have yield loss as well. So they've got various recommendations for that, mostly if they're healthy, just to wait and leave them in the ground. And then the other group that I've been talking to quite a bit is pecan growers, and they have stopped irrigating because if the ground is wet, it's more likely for those winds to tip over the trees, which of course would not be good. But also, if they get too much rain, it reduces the quality of the pecans and they have more splitting. And so most of the pecan growers have stopped irrigating now, and the early varieties are ready to harvest. I did see some harvest on Twitter, but most of the varieties still have about a month to go, so they're really watching the tropics carefully. If we go on, just a reminder that there's some really fantastic preparedness guides for hurricanes from the USDA Southeast Climate Hub. The website is there, and I know Meredith will put it in the recap as well. They have a guide for each state in the Southeast, but they also have guides by commodity. So if you grow cotton, for example, you can go and look up the specific recommendations they have for cotton. And I think you'll find that to be really useful. That was just published in the last couple of years, so it's pretty close to date, and I think it has a lot of very useful information. And then if we go on, just looking ahead over the next few weeks, the amount of rain that we get, of course, is going to depend a lot on the path of Ian. most of the rain will tend to fall near the center of the path plus to the right, which is why Alabama looks fairly dry on the map here on the top. But there may very well be some changes. It depends also on the speed of Ian. As Ian goes, if it goes slower, then there's a chance for more rain accumulation at any one spot. So we'll be watching that pretty closely. I think at least most areas in Georgia will get at least a couple inches of rain. And Florida, of course, could get much more than that, as Chris mentioned. So that's something that we're going to be watching. Temperatures generally, it's been fairly cool because we've had a couple of cool fronts come in, but after Ian moves out, I think we're going to see mostly warm and dry conditions, so farmers will be able to get back into the fields after a few days of drying and get back to work harvesting. After that, there is one storm out in the Atlantic, as Chris pointed out, but I think that's probably going to just drift to the north. I don't really see that it's coming towards us in the southeast. And so after that, there's not a lot of wave actions that are coming off of Africa, although this time of year, often the storms form in the Gulf of Mexico, so we'll be watching that as well. And just a reminder, we still have a long way to go before the end of the hurricane season, so we're not out of the woods yet, but at least for now, things look good. So if we go on, my summary slide, we'll skip for lack of time, and I will pass it on to Emily and her crew.
Thank you. And just give me a moment to bring up my slides. And are you seeing a full screen intro slide?
I do, Emily. Looks great.
Okay, thank you. So we will go ahead and begin. All right, so good morning, everyone. I'm Emily, the Web Communications Branch Chief within the Integrated Information Dissemination Division in USGS's Water Resources Mission Area. I live in Madison, Wisconsin, and I use the pronouns she, her. I just want to say a brief thanks to Charlie Stillwell, a colleague from USGS, for facilitating our presence here, and thanks to Meredith for the official invite. So go ahead and jump right in. I am joined today by my colleague, Randy Butler, product owner. Randy is based in Atlanta, Georgia, and you're going to hear from Randy in the second part of this presentation. So at USGS, we have a suite of products and services which provide publicly accessible water data for the nation. And as many of you know, we've been sharing this data on the internet for decades, but the systems to share this data have become outdated. And so we're on a long haul mission to modernize these systems, expanding discoverability, accessibility, and usability of our nation's water data. So we're excited to modernize and provide all new highly requested features to our systems, but definitely moving forward here with thanks for the existing and legacy systems, because none of this would be possible without them. I also want to say a brief thanks to the team that makes water data for the nation possible. This is a cross-functional team from USGS Water Mission Area and also from water science centers within the USGS. We're really proud of this modernization effort because it's increasing the visibility and accessibility of USGS water data. The National Water Information System, or Endless Web, hosts our legacy web products that have been around for decades, delivering crucial water data to everyone. But we're gradually replacing our outdated web presence with modernized data delivery products hosted by Water Data for the Nation. So I'm going to talk briefly about our process of modernization so that you can understand how it works and effectively engage with us as we're building out these products for you. Our work is user-centered, transparent, and dynamic, and we're really putting users, including all of you, at the front of this process by developing what we call agile products. So we're developing products, web products, including some that we're going to talk about today, using a version of project management that is called Agile Development Process. And this is kind of a detailed slide showing this here. You don't have to take in all of the details, but what I do want you to know is that through usability testing and iterative development, the Agile process allows for regular communication with our product users. Agile allows us to iteratively improve products, and we'll talk about how you can get involved in this process to give us that important feedback later in the presentation. One of the things that's challenging about the work that we're doing is that it is this modernization work. It's like a house renovation. We're renovating one room at a time while we're still living in the house and while all of you are metaphorically living in the house too. So we want to say thank you for your patience and feedback as we move through this process of modernization together. So we started this remodeling, metaphorical remodeling, with the most prominent and visible room in this house, the one that receives over 90% of our visitors, which for us are the web pages that display water data for individual monitoring locations. And we call these pages the legacy current condition real-time pages. This is one of them that you're looking at here. These pages have been around since the mid-1990s, providing crucial data on water conditions for sites nationwide, including things like stream discharge and gauge height. The data presented on these pages are sourced from sites that many of your organizations, as both cooperators and partners to the USGS, help support. And we know that you also rely on this information for your work as well. So these legacy pages were really groundbreaking in their day, and they've served us well, but they're becoming outdated, difficult to enhance, and they're not mobile friendly. We do know that about 2/3 of our users access data through mobile devices or tablets. So we're modernizing these legacy current conditions real-time pages, and we've created next generation monitoring location pages. Some of the features of these next generation pages are an interactive hydrograph that you can see right at the top of the page there that allows you to view up to 2 parameters at a time. The hydrograph includes gauge operational limits, which can be really important both in low flow events and also high flow events. So at those extremes, it's important to know if the gauge is operational or not. And also what's depicted on these hydrographs are National Weather Service flood stages where they're available. So both of these references are probably pretty relevant for this group today. The pages also include an interactive map showing nearby sites, upstream and downstream sites, and depicting some basin features. There are links back into the NWIS web legacy pages if there are data that are not yet modernized that you need access to, so you'll always be able to go back and find those other data sets. There's custom site-specific text that is depicted on these pages and alerts that gets shown at the top. And then finally, if there are cameras or videos available, that also gets shown on these pages. So there's other pages with data that we have not yet modernized because we're taking kind of a step-by-step process to this. Soon, these legacy pages will automatically redirect to the next gen pages, but at any time, if you need to access the legacy pages, you will be able to click this link at the top that just got highlighted, legacy real-time page, underneath the monitoring location title on the next gen pages. And you can also click on the data inventory, also outlined in blue here, to access other legacy only features for now. I want to encourage you, if you haven't had a chance to use these pages yet, I want to encourage you to scan this QR code or follow a link that we'll distribute after this talk, just to watch a 5-minute video about how to use these pages. I want you to be aware that in July of 2023, we will be decommissioning the legacy current conditions real-time pages. Just those pages will be decommissioned. Other parts of NWIS Web will still be available until suitable replacements have been built. You can read more about our plans for decommissioning on our blog, and that's another link that we'll share out with you in the recap. And next, what I'm going to do is hand the mic over to my colleague, Randy Butler, to give updates about another next generation product rollout. So Randy, go ahead and take it away.
All right, hello everyone. I am Randy Butler. I am the product owner for some of these products that Emily mentioned. And I will be continuing on with the presentation for us. All right, so I think Emily, you still have control of the page. Okay, thank you. All right, so decades ago, USGS felt an emerging need for receiving instant information about monitoring locations, especially when scientists weren't on site. So USGS created WaterAlert. And WaterAlert has served critical information in a timely manner, improving functionality across our enterprise and beyond. By providing an important service to thousands of users daily. One user says, I have a cabin about 300 miles from my home, and I appreciate getting the alert so I know if water level is rising. WaterAlert helps me protect my property and stay informed. And you can type in the chat how you think a service like this could help you serve your community and your community needs if you would like. And we'll also take those notes when we're done. All right. Okay. So the next legacy interface, unfortunately, has not been kept up with advancing technology, preventing it from effectively serving all of our users' needs. It is outdated and it's not easy to use or intuitive for our never before users. So, along with our long haul mission to modernize our display of water data, we're modernizing WaterAlert, and we created Next Gen WaterAlert to fully replace the legacy WaterAlert. This is the same tried and true subscription service, but in a more mobile and user-friendly format with greater flexibility and all new features. Currently, users may wonder what will happen to their existing alerts during this product replacement, but rest assured, your alerts will appear in Next Gen WaterAlert as long as you take 3 simple steps. We emailed and text users recently, and actually yesterday again, with a link to transition. If you haven't completed your transition yet and you need help, please contact us. Our email address is wdfn@usgs.gov, which we will again share at the end of our presentation. Our transition period is closing on September 30th, so you only have a few days left. And if you don't transition, but still want alerts, you can easily create new alerts in the Next Generation WaterAlert. If you are new to WaterAlert, we're happy you're here. Next Generation WaterAlert can be used now. Watch our 5-minute how-to video for Next Gen WaterAlert by scanning this QR code on the screen or by clicking the link in the chat that we'll actually add later. I'm sorry about that. However, this 5-minute video will go through the process of how to use WaterAlert from signing in to creating alert. WaterAlert will continue to improve over time as we update and release new features using our agile development process. Want to learn more about how we work using agile? Read this blog post or watch this video. Links will be given out after our presentation so you can get to these sites. An important part of agile product development is our usability testing, which we conduct as part of our user-centered design. In usability testing, we ask you questions like, if you needed this piece of information, how would you go about getting it? Or if you couldn't find what you were looking for, what would you do? Would you like to test new features in WaterAlert or other products? If you want to test new features, email us and tell us a little about which products you use and how you use them, and we'll add you to our usability testing roster. We use your feedback to improve our designs to make sure they are working for you, our users. Send us an email at wdfn_usabilitytesting@usgs.gov and email us with the subject WaterAlert if you're interested in testing WaterAlert specifically. If you're interested in testing other products or features, tell us briefly which one and the subject of your email. So, here are some key takeaways from our presentation. Our Next Gen, for monitoring location, Next Gen pages have new features available, such as displaying 2 parameters, and our legacy current condition pages will be decommissioned in 2023, July of 2023. And for WaterAlert, you can transition all the way up from now till September 30th using a link sent via text and email that is specific to you. And if you are not transitioning, you can still join or get on WaterAlert by just creating an account, and it's currently available to all users. All right, before, I believe we're doing a question and answer, are we? I'm not sure. But Please
Yeah.
follow us if you want to on social media. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at USGS_water. And of course, check out our blog once we send it to you all.
Great. Thank you so much, Randy, as well as Emily, for joining us today and talking us through this really substantial effort on behalf of USGS. So good morning, everyone. My name is Meredith Muth. I work for NOAA's National Integrated Drought Information System, NIDIS, one of 3 co-organizers along with the National Weather Service and the Southeast Regional Climate Center for this webinar series that has now been going on for nearly 3 years. If you have any questions right now for any of our speakers, please add those into the question box. Or any comments or questions about climate in the Southeast that you didn't hear today that you're curious about, we'd be happy to do our best to try to answer those. A webinar summary and recording will be emailed later today. Feel free to share those. They will also be posted on the US Drought portal, drought.gov. Our next webinar series will be on October 25th, where we'll receive a presentation on another great tool called Climate Perspectives Tool, Climper. It's been utilized in almost every single webinar we've had, where it allows you to compare recent weather and climate situations with prior time periods at a given location. So that'll be great to get a little tutorial. And we also have upcoming webinars on ENSO as well as a year in review. There will be no webinar in December. One last thing before we start Q&A is that if you have any comments or suggestions on helping us to improve this webinar series or specific topics you would like for us to cover, please go ahead and take a moment to complete the post-webinar survey or reach out to me directly. Thank you very much. So what we'll do right now is go to Q&A. Our first one is for Chris. Chris, this is related to the triple dip that you mentioned for ENSO. What exactly does a triple dip La Niña mean, and what are the impacts?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. So when I mentioned the triple dip La Niña, what that means is back to back to back. So 3 consecutive La Niña seasons. And so I showed on that slide there, I showed that that's only occurred twice since 1950. So it's not entirely rare, okay, but I mean it does happen every so often. It's more common that we see back-to-back La Niñas, so one season in La Niña and then the following season before we transition to neutral and then El Nino. As far as the impacts go, for a La Niña, my understanding is, in particular on the West Coast, they're really interested to see how this will impact the drought conditions out there. So when we have a La Niña, typically we have a ridge of high pressure over the eastern Pacific that tends to keep a lot of the Pacific storms to the north. And so places from about central California into the southwest and also across much of the southern tier of the U.S. tend to stay clear of those storms, and so they tend to be warmer and drier. So my understanding is the drought impacts are the ones that they're focusing on the most. There are probably some others as well, but the drought impact is the one I think that really stands out.
And I'll add to that, just because we've been fortunate having 2 La Niñas in a row where we haven't really gone into a drought. We've had enough rainfall during these times in the southeast where they've been, I think, weak enough that we've stayed kind of wet. So because typically, as was shown, that we typically have, Chris showed that we have a drier. We typically are dry during that time of year during a La Niña, and it hasn't happened yet. So we'll have to see whether this year pans out with that or whether we continue to stay, at least normal for the winter season this year.
Thank you, Chris and Todd. We don't have any other questions right now. So is there any final comments from any of our presenters or speakers for the audience? Oh, we do have a question coming in. Okay. So this question is, I would say, primarily for Chris, but we have a couple of other folks on the line that I am sure can answer. let me see if I can, it's kind of long. Oh, I'm sorry. It's a suggestion for a topic. So it's about rapid transitions in the future. Thank you for providing that. We'll definitely look for that as a future presentation topic. So with that, with no more questions or comments, I'd just like to again thank our speakers, especially Emily and Randy from USGS, really highlighting a very user-friendly tool that I think is just going to be incredibly helpful, especially with the real-time alert system. Thank you so much. And our other presenters, Todd, Pam, and welcome aboard, Chris, to join our webinar team. With that, I hope especially our friends and colleagues in Florida and along the coast stay safe with the upcoming storm. And we look forward to talking to you next month. Thank you all. Have a great morning.